Pay close attention. The news you're about to see is fulfilling Bible prophecy.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you the news that relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yusra Hawkins. Well, in the news this week, famines and those who are suffering the most from them. Also, farmers are having a hard time putting food on the table for themselves. We have these stories and also an interesting interview from a former Secretary of Defense. But first, how about a different perspective? Well, every February 14th is National Donor Day. Now, the goal is to raise awareness of the benefits of organ, eye, and tissue donation. Nearly 120,000 Americans are on the national transplant waiting list. But in China, where the population is almost 1.4 billion, there is a severe shortage of organ donors. So science is taking it up to the next level.
Wow, interesting. Well, Chinese scientists are attempting to restore people's sight using breakthrough technology. However, the eyes they're using are not from humans. They actually come from pigs. Ooh. Yeah, that's right, pigs. John Kong Shao is the CEO of China Regenerative Medicine International, the company that's pioneering the procedure to make pigs or pig corneas suitable, they say, for human transplant.
Mr. Shao told CBS News after exploring many different animal options, they concluded that the pig's cornea is very similar to the human cornea. Now, the Chinese traditionally believe bodies should be left intact upon death, so organ donation is rare in the country. With 4 million Chinese suffering from cornea disease, the demand far outweighs the supply when it comes to human eyes.
Interesting. Now, some surgeons are dealing in swine daily, but they are not always telling their patients the source of the eyes they will be using. One Dr. Wei Un-shu told CBS News, "We don't usually say it's from a pig." Well, they don't tell anybody. We say it's an engineered product. It's an engineered product. He claimed that if they told people the eye was from a pig, some would refuse it, while others wouldn't care as long as they could see again.
Well, Mr. Li Ping lost his sight due to an infection and could no longer work in construction, which was how he supported his family. So he spent almost $6,000 for an eye transplant operation, but was not aware he would be receiving the cornea from a pig. Upon learning this information, however, he was surprised, but related to reporters, it's a lot better than not being able to see.
Wow. Well, Iraqi forces backed by the U.S. are continuing to attack ISIS with all their might. Their goal? To push ISIS out of Iraq completely. Since October, they have been focused on Mosul, Iraq's second largest city. ISIS seized Mosul back in 2014. It's currently the militant group's last major stronghold in the country. Iraq's military assault has resulted in the liberation of village after village while they work their way toward the city's airport. Before the campaign began, Iraq planes dropped millions of leaflets warning civilians that an attack on ISIS was imminent. And leaflets also warn Islamic State militants to surrender.
The Prime Minister of Iraq, al-Abadi, made the announcement on state-run television back in October of last year that the country would begin its aggressive new operation. He said, "We call on our brave troops to start the push to liberate the rest of the city and to liberate the people from the oppression and terrorism of ISIS."
It is believed that 600,000 civilians live in the western part of the city alone, with the Islamic State blocking off escape routes and the government's troops literally bringing the terrorists under siege. Civilians are left in an even more desperate situation. Already basic needs such as food and water have been reported to be scarce by those who have actually managed to escape.
Well, with wars taking place around the globe, we already face the ever-growing danger of a nuclear war daily. But a recent report from a nuclear watchdog has uncovered we've come closer to a nuclear disaster more times than we care to count, and it has already cost over 100 lives in one country alone. Now, the nonprofit organization Nuclear Information Service released records from the UK revealing over 100 nuclear alerts have been covered up in the country.
Official records do not raise the level of concern that this new report exposes. As a result, the report shows that 116 deaths have occurred to British nuclear workers. Breaking it down a little, there have been 7 industrial accidents, 9 suspected radiological contamination incidents, and there were 100 fatal cancers as a result of the 1957 Windscale reactor fire.
Well, some of the incidents are quite unsettling. For instance, the Royal Navy accidentally took nuclear depth charges with them to the Falkland War in 1982. Now, this was aboard the ship which Prince Andrew was serving on. Then in 1987, the Defense Ministry imposed an information blackout when 4 nuclear bombs went sliding off a truck into a ditch in southern England.
Ooh, that's scary. Well, the report gets worse in 2009 when British and French submarines nearly collided in the Atlantic. Both had nuclear warheads on board. It also shows 6 nuclear weapons were damaged. There were 4 unintentional nuclear detonations, 27 fires, and 8 explosions.
Well, the government has acknowledged they know just one accident could end in total disaster, and while that hasn't occurred, there has been a cost. 116 British citizens have lost their lives. And so there have been accidents that you can classify as having put the public at risk over the course of the country's nuclear history. And it's very thankful, Catan, being so close so many times that nothing disastrous has taken place.
Right, yeah, you're absolutely correct. And there will continue to be a risk, Jeff, as we just saw last month, when they test-fired missiles. A test-fired missile actually misfired, and the malfunctioned missile had to self-destruct off of the coast of the United States as a result of that misfiring. The details of that, however, were kept from British MPs ahead of their Trident renewal vote last summer, which we actually spoke about in a recent news broadcast. So no doubt there may have been even more anger from the In the Dark MPs following the release of this week's report too.
Right, and those aren't the only ones that are in the dark. They kind of keep it from the public as well because it would make people very nervous if they really knew that.
Sure would.
Well, in a recent interview with RT's Sophie and Co., former U.S. Secretary of Defense William J. Perry gave his views on how the current administration's access to nuclear weapons could potentially lead to nuclear war. Let's take a look at this interview.
One of the world's biggest nuclear arsenals is now in the hands of Donald Trump, as the new commander-in-chief is handed the codes to America's nukes. With the nuclear threat ever present, how will Washington's policy shape up in this regard? When former United States Secretary of Defense William J. Perry is with me today to discuss all of that.
As the legacy of a bipolar world order wanes, global politics is becoming increasingly uncertain. And with the world's nuclear powers embroiled in the worst standoff in decades, the prospect of nuclear war is suddenly not so outlandish. The prospect of nuclear war is suddenly not so outlandish. With one accident potentially leading to the unthinkable, are nuclear arms still the strongest deterrent of war, or are they the biggest menace to the security of the world?
Former United States Secretary of Defense William Perry, welcome to the show. Great to have you with us. Mr. Perry, I remember 10 years ago at the Munich Security Conference, Putin actually warned of growing global instability, wars in the Middle East, NATO expansion, and a nuclear arms race. Putin actually warned of growing global instability, wars in the Middle East, NATO expansion, and a nuclear arms race. Now, that was a decade ago. Why have things got only worse during this time?
I think both the United States and Russia have found themselves engaged in a war of words. Rhetoric that's been increasingly belligerent, and also military buildups and threats to military buildups. I think that has put us on a dangerous path And I'm hoping that President Trump and President Putin will be able to find a way of getting us on a safer path relative to our security of both of our countries.
Well, President Trump has called for the expansion of America's nuclear capabilities on one occasion, and another he's called for reducing nukes very substantially. So which one is it going to be? What's your guess?
I think we won't really know what President Trump is going to do on defense issues, national security issues, until he submits his first defense budget in a few months. There we will see whether he's willing to spend additional funds for defense, which compete, of course, with other pressures from the economy, in particular, what he will do relative to nuclear weapons. I think on the nuclear weapons, he has said he's going to maintain a strong military, but there it very much depends on what Russia is doing on nuclear weapons. There's a possibility for both Russia and the United States to increase their spending on nuclear weapons, which seems to be the direction we're heading now. That would not only be costly for both countries, but I think dangerous for both countries. There's a possibility for both Russia and the United States to increase their spending on nuclear weapons, which seems to be the direction we're heading now. That would not only be costly for both countries, but I think dangerous for both countries.
So you might be wondering, what does Mr. Perry have to say about the threat of accidents that can lead to a nuclear war, comparing that to times past, which there have been nuclear threats. We have just went over some accidents that took place in Britain and with some other countries. But how would that compare to times past and now? Let's continue taking a look there.
What is different now is that besides the danger of a nuclear war, that is the danger of either the United States or Russia miscalculating or blundering into nuclear war, it's quite clear to me that neither country wants a nuclear war and would deliberately start a nuclear war. The danger now is the same as the danger in the Cold War, that we would blunder into a Cold War, as we almost did, for example, during the Cuban Missile Crisis. But beyond those dangers, which are like the dangers in the Cold War, there are new dangers. One of them is the possibility of nuclear terrorism. And of course, a nuclear bomb set off by a terror group could go off in Moscow or in Washington or in New York or in St. Petersburg. So that danger is new. It didn't exist during the Cold War. And beyond that, there's the danger of a regional nuclear war, for example, between India and Pakistan. So those are new dangers that didn't exist during the Cold War. So the danger of some kind of a nuclear catastrophe, I think, is therefore greater than it was during the Cold War.
According to Associated Press report, the personnel who man America's nukes are poorly trained and have to use retrotech to run the systems, including 8-inch floppy disks. Why neglect maintaining the nuclear deterrent?
I think those accounts are exaggerated, but I am concerned that both in the United States and Russia, that the people who have been manning our nuclear sites for many, many years now don't have the motivation or perhaps even the skills to do it properly. So that's one of the reasons for finding a way of lowering the dangers. In particular, I put a great emphasis on the danger of our ground-based missiles, our ICBM, intercontinental ballistic missiles, because there the danger is the danger of an accidental war starting. That is, if either the Russian alert system or the American alert system makes a mistake and falsely indicates an attack underway, then there's an impetus on either president to make a rapid decision to launch his ICBMs before the other side's ICBM lands. And of course, if his alert system is wrong, if there's a false alarm, then that president will have accidentally started a nuclear war. Now, this is not an academic possibility. There have been at least 2 false alarms in Russia that I know about, and at least 3 false alarms that I know about in the United States.
Now, you mentioned India and Pakistan. What would be the consequences of a limited regional nuclear war?
Well, we have to define limited very carefully, because both India and Pakistan have more than 100 nuclear weapons, perhaps 200. And if they used even half of their arsenals against each other, the cities, there would be tens of millions of casualties in India and Pakistan. So it would be a really catastrophic event. Beyond that, the soot and the fumes from the fire in these cities will go into the atmosphere and change the composition of the atmosphere, probably lowering temperatures around the planet a degree or 2 or 3. And that in turn could cause widespread crop failure. So the effect would not only be profound on India and Pakistan, but actually the unlimited nuclear war of that magnitude could affect people all over the planet. So the effect would not only be profound on India and Pakistan, but actually the unlimited nuclear war of that magnitude could affect people all over the planet.
Ton, it's an interesting point of view from a former defense secretary. Well, while the risk of nuclear destruction and its consequences loom certain on the horizon, economically, some are already suffering, as can be seen by hardships being faced by those who work most closely with it. Larry McGee has been following the story for us on failing farms and famines. Larry?
Farms are going broke right and left, and America's heartland is taking a blow as competitive pricing and global spikes in food production are producing insecure times for American farmers. Fifth-generation farmer Don Teskey says that corn used to sell at $8 a few years ago, but this year he has had to sell his for $2.87, and that, he says, just does not pay the bills. The increase in worldwide production, which is being fingered as the cause, is reportedly producing a multi-year decline in prices for key commodities such as wheat and corn. The tragic irony is that while prices for commodities are dropping, the costs for operating a farm are increasing. Even more saddening, the USDA is predicting a 9% drop in income for farmers. There's an expectation, thus, that more operations will close this year, in addition to the 140,000 that have either closed or consolidated since 2007. Heartbreakingly, for the heartland, the future looks uncertain, and longtime tillers like Mr. Teskey fear that if the trend continues, America will lose an entire generation of some of its hardest workers. Strangely, while prices in certain locations are reportedly rising due to an increase in food on the world markets, there are other areas where people are dying as a result of food shortages. According to UN humanitarian coordinator Jamie McGoldrick, 7 million Yemenis do not know where their next meal will come from and are even closer to starvation. He went on to say that in a country of 27 million people, over 17 million are currently unable to adequately feed themselves and are forced to skip meals, and women and girls eat the least and last. The UN official has expressed a deep concern over the lack of peace in the region due to brawling between the Yemeni government and mercenaries in its west, the cost of which has been a reduction in the number of ships and food supplies that are able to make their way into the nation whose economy is heavily dependent upon imports. The most alarming impact is being seen amongst those who are most helpless. According to UN figures, over 462,000 children are suffering from acute malnutrition. Mr. Goldrick is saying that at this point, the conflict has reached unbearable limits and that it is important for us to realize that enough is enough. The people of Yemen, he says, have had enough for 2 years, and there is only so much that a community, a family, can take and endure, and people are coming to the end of that ability to sustain or continue to survive in the country. The unrest in the nation is said to have produced 4 million refugees to date. The turmoil across the broader Euphrates region, including Nigeria, Somalia, Yemen, and South Sudan, is reportedly producing malnourished children by the hundreds of thousands who are at severe risk of death and 9 times more vulnerable than healthy children to diseases such as measles and malaria. The latest UN proposition to relieve the suffering in the region is provoking an exasperated chuckle from many. The UN would like more money, $5.6 billion in fact, to fix the crisis. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Katan Jeff, back to you.
Terrible situation, and continuing with the famines and the suffering taking place, and like they said, that this generation, it's almost hard to help them. Now they're looking at this next coming generation, how they're suffering, see if they can do something about that.
Yeah, but it's continuously increasing. It's not getting any better.
Right.
Well, Boko Haram and its reign of terror has left in its wake plenty of damage, broken villages, and devastated people. In the northeastern Nigerian village Beni Sheikh, one villager tells about Boko Haram and what they brought to their village. He said Boko Haram killed people, more than 3,000 people, more than 1,000 houses gone, he said. Boko Haram's 7-year insurgency has also prevented the planting of crops, and of course the UN says that close to 3 million people are facing famine at this time.
Along with those numbers, the UN estimates that over 1 million children suffer from severe acute malnutrition. Uganda Motu, a mother, said that she and her children need food. The biggest problem we have is hunger. An international donors conference has pledged over $700 million over the next 3 years. The problem with that, Katan, for many Nigerians is that it's too long to wait.
Yeah, no doubt, because they're actually hungry right now.
That's
they need
right.
the food, they need the resources today. Well, in East Africa, food prices have been rapidly climbing due to a severe drought. Low and unpredictable rainfall has caused significant damage to agricultural output in many regions across, according to the agricultural officials. Minister of State for Agriculture, Christopher Kibanzanga, said in an interview with Press TV, "This is a very big challenge for the country, the region, and especially for the Minister of Agriculture. To continue thinking that we must rely on the vagaries of nature can no longer work today."
Well, the government said that cereal prices have reached record highs in Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, South Sudan, Somalia, and Ethiopia. High food prices are making access to food difficult for many households. Children are also going without food because farmers aren't harvesting crops due to poor yields. And beans now cost 40% more in Kenya than they did a year ago. And in Uganda, corn prices are up a staggering 75%. So it's making it that much harder for people to obtain food, even if they have it available.
Right, and we're even seeing with the droughts in the States, the reflection of those increased prices with crops as well. Well, farther east in Africa, the drought conditions are even worse, with severe drought conditions reducing the available food for animals to graze, along with the availability of water for them to drink. And as a result, in the lack of those two things, those animals have reduced body mass.
In South Sudan, many of its people are dying of hunger, but not from drought, as there is plenty of fertile land. The crisis isn't weather-related, but man-made, due to a civil war and a collapsing economy. Now, government leaders and the UN have declared famine conditions in unity states in the north, where around 100,000 people are on the verge of starvation, and almost 5 million people, about half the population, are in need of urgent help.
That, along with around 250,000 children, are severely malnourished. UN officials describe the situation as grave, and it will get worse as 1 million more are on the verge of famine. Well, sadly, world leaders and organizations are without answers to famine, war, and disease. Their solution? Well, just throw money at it and maybe it'll go away. Well, the mindset of that is about as beneficial as, well, a pig's eye. The only way to fix suffering is to go to the cause. The cause of mankind's suffering, as one man said previously, is man-made. Well, man can't fix it, but Yisrael Hawkins teaches Yahweh can, and he shows us how to. Well, to find out more about the answers to all of mankind's problems, contact the House of Yahweh, and when you do so, don't forget to request your free copy of the Prophetic Word magazine and the monthly newsletter.
To contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at The House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas, 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them on any of their websites, www.yahweh.com, www.yisraelhawkins.com, or www.yahwehsbranch.com. You can also visit our website at www.ypnnews.com. yahwehsays.com. For any email, you can email to info@yahweh.com. For any international calls, you can call the number that's on your screen. And once again, we'd like to draw your attention to two of the greatest Bible study tools on the market today, the Yisrael Says program and the Ask Yisrael. And you can find out more by going to www.yisraelsays.com or www.askyisrael.com.
Well, don't go anywhere. Up next, Yisrael Hawkins. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Katan Alexander.
And I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
Thank you for watching.